November 18th, 1978. Deep within the jungles of Guyana, more than 900 people lay dead. Men, women, elderly followers, entire families. Among the victims were over 300 children. The world struggled to understand what had happened. How could so many people willingly follow a single man to such a horrifying end? Was it fear? Was it blind loyalty? Or was it something far more complex? At the center of the tragedy stood one man, Jim Jones. To his followers, he was a prophet, a healer, a revolutionary fighting for equality and justice. To critics, he was a manipulator who demanded absolute obedience. Today, many historians consider him one of the most dangerous cult leaders in modern history. Yet Jim Jones did not begin as a monster. His story began with a lonely child growing up in rural America. A child who dreamed of power. A child who learned how to influence people. And a child who would eventually build a movement so powerful that thousands surrendered their money, their families, and ultimately their lives. This is the story of Jim Jones and the rise and fall of the People's Temple. Origin Jim Warren Jones was born on May 13th, 1931, in the small town of Lynn, Indiana. America was in the middle of the Great Depression. Millions of families struggled to survive. Jobs were scarce. Money was limited. Life was difficult for many Americans, including the Jones family. Jim's father, James Thurman Jones, was a disabled veteran who had difficulty maintaining stable employment. His mother, Lynetta Jones, worked long hours to support the household. Because his parents were often occupied, young Jim spent much of his childhood alone. Neighbors later described him as an unusual child. He rarely participated in normal childhood activities. Instead, he became fascinated by religion. He attended different churches throughout the community and carefully observed the behavior of preachers. He studied how they spoke, how they moved, how they commanded attention. Even as a child, Jones seemed to understand that people were willing to follow someone who appeared confident and certain. According to former acquaintances, Jones often gathered neighborhood children and conducted mock church services. He would preach sermons, perform baptisms, and sometimes even hold funerals for dead animals he found nearby. Many considered these activities strange, but they revealed something important. Jones was already practicing leadership. As he entered his teenage years, he developed a growing interest in politics and social issues. America during the 1940s remained deeply divided by racial segregation. Black Americans faced discrimination in schools, businesses, housing, and public life. Jones became increasingly interested in racial equality. Whether his concern was entirely genuine or partly motivated by ambition remains a matter of debate among historians. What is clear is that he recognized an opportunity. Many churches at the time remained segregated. Jones believed he could attract followers by offering something different. After graduating from high school, he married Marceline Baldwin in 1949. The couple would eventually adopt children from different racial backgrounds, creating what Jones proudly called a rainbow family. To many observers, this reinforced his reputation as a progressive religious leader. During the 1950s, Jones began preaching more seriously. He combined traditional Christianity with social activism. His sermons emphasized helping the poor, feeding the hungry, and promoting racial integration. These messages resonated with many people, especially those who felt ignored by mainstream society. In 1955, Jones established the organization that would later become as People's Temple. At first, there was little reason to suspect anything dangerous. The church organized food drives, helped struggling families, provided assistance to elderly residents. Members volunteered their time to support people in need. For many followers, People's Temple genuinely improved their lives. But while Jones publicly preached compassion and equality, another side of his personality was emerging. He increasingly enjoyed being admired, being trusted, being obeyed. The church was no longer simply a religious organization. It was becoming a vehicle for power, and Jim Jones wanted more: recruitment. By the 1960s, People's Temple had begun attracting significant attention. Jones proved to be an exceptionally effective recruiter. He understood something many leaders never learn. People rarely join organizations because they are searching for control. They join because they are searching for hope. Jones offered exactly that. At a time when racial tensions divided much of America, People's Temple welcomed both black and white members. At a time when poverty affected countless families, the church offered assistance. At a time when many people felt isolated, the organization provided a sense of community. For elderly individuals living alone, People's Temple became a family. For struggling parents, it became a support network. For people facing discrimination, it became a place where they felt accepted. Jones carefully cultivated this image. He presented himself as a man dedicated to social justice, a man willing to challenge racism, a man committed to helping the vulnerable. His reputation grew rapidly. As membership increased, Jones expanded operations into California. This move dramatically increased his influence. The state offered access to larger populations and greater political opportunities. Soon, People's Temple established strong presences in cities such as San Francisco and Los Angeles. Jones became increasingly involved in politics. He built relationships with community leaders and public officials. Many respected figures publicly praised his charitable work. This legitimacy made recruitment even easier. If politicians trusted Jim Jones, why shouldn't ordinary citizens? What new members could not see was that the organization they joined was slowly changing. Behind the scenes, Jones was becoming more controlling, more paranoid, more demanding. The foundation of a cult was already being built. It simply wasn't visible yet, and for thousands of followers, the warning signs remained hidden behind promises of hope and equality. As People's Temple continued to grow throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, Jim Jones's behavior began to change. Or perhaps more accurately, the real Jim Jones was finally emerging. To the public, Jones still appeared to be a compassionate religious leader fighting for equality. Inside the organization, however, members were beginning to witness a far different reality. Jones demanded increasing levels of loyalty. He wanted more than admiration. He wanted obedience. Followers were encouraged to place the needs of the temple above their own needs. Many donated large portions of their income. Some surrendered their homes, vehicles, savings accounts, and personal property. Everything was supposedly for the greater good. Jones argued that private ownership created inequality. By giving their possessions to the temple, members believed they were helping build a better society. In reality, this made them increasingly dependent on the organization. Leaving became much harder when a person had no money, no property, and nowhere else to go. Jones also began controlling information. Followers were encouraged to spend most of their time with other temple members. Outside influences were portrayed as dangerous. Friends and family who criticized the organization were often labeled enemies. This created an us versus them mentality. The world outside the temple became a threat. The temple itself became the only safe place. This tactic is common among destructive cults. The more isolated people become, the more difficult it is for them to compare their experiences with reality. Jones understood this perfectly. He also became increasingly obsessed with loyalty tests. Members were often required to prove their devotion publicly. Those who questioned him could be humiliated in front of the congregation. Former followers later described meetings where individuals were forced to confess personal mistakes, embarrassing secrets, or alleged betrayals. These confessions served an important purpose. They weakened personal independence. People became afraid of standing out, afraid of disagreeing, afraid of becoming the next target. Jones frequently reminded members that he knew everything. He claimed to possess supernatural abilities. Some followers believed he could read minds. Others believed he could predict the future. Many of these supposed miracles were carefully staged. Former members later revealed that Jones often gathered private information about individuals before public meetings. He would then reveal details that appeared impossible for him to know. To the audience, it seemed miraculous. In reality, it was manipulation. As years passed, Jones became increasingly paranoid. He claimed enemies were everywhere: government agencies, journalists, capitalists, political opponents. According to Jones, all were plotting to destroy people's temple. This fear became one of his most effective tools. When people are frightened, they often seek protection. Jones presented himself as that protection. The solution to every problem was simple: trust Jim Jones. Obey Jim Jones. Stay with the temple. By the mid-1970s, he had transformed a church into a system of near-total control. But an even greater transformation was about to begin. One that would eventually end in catastrophe. By 1976, negative stories about People's Temple were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Former members had begun speaking publicly about abuse inside the organization. Journalists investigated allegations of manipulation, financial exploitation, and physical punishment. Concerned relatives accused Jones of separating families and controlling followers. The scrutiny terrified him. Jones believed, or claimed to believe, that powerful forces were preparing to destroy everything he had built. Rather than face growing criticism, he developed a radical solution. He would leave the United States entirely. Years earlier, the temple had acquired land in the South American nation of Guyana. The remote property sat deep within the jungle, far from major cities and outside the reach of many critics. Jones described the settlement as a socialist paradise, a place where members could live in equality and harmony, a place free from racism, poverty, and oppression. To followers, the idea sounded inspiring. Many willingly relocated. Some viewed the move as an exciting new beginning. Others felt pressure to comply. By 1977, hundreds of members had arrived at the settlement. The community became known as Jonestown. At first glance, Jonestown appeared impressive. Residents worked together, food was grown locally, children attended school, community events were organized regularly. Jones proudly promoted the settlement as proof that his vision could succeed. Visitors were shown smiling residents and productive farms. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind the carefully managed image, conditions were deteriorating. Life inside Jonestown. Life in Jonestown was far harsher than many members expected. The tropical climate was exhausting. Temperatures were high. Humidity was constant. Mosquitoes were everywhere. Agricultural work demanded long hours of physical labor. Many residents worked from sunrise until evening. Food shortages became common. Despite promises of abundance, meals were often limited and repetitive. Medical care was inadequate. Living conditions were crowded. Privacy was almost non-existent. Most importantly, leaving was extremely difficult. Jonestown's remote location made escape challenging. The nearest towns were far away. Transportation options were limited. Armed guards monitored parts of the settlement. Jones maintained strict control over communication. Letters were sometimes censored. Phone access was restricted. Information from the outside world became increasingly scarce. Meanwhile, Jones's mental and physical health appeared to decline. Reports suggest he suffered from various health problems and relied heavily on prescription medications. His speeches became longer, more erratic, more paranoid. Residents were often required to attend lengthy meetings late into the night. During these gatherings, Jones warned followers about enemies preparing to attack. He described imaginary threats, government invasions, military assaults, conspiracies. The danger, he insisted, was always just around the corner. Many members lived in a constant state of fear. Perhaps the most chilling practice involved what became known as white nights. During these exercises, Jones would gather residents and announce that the settlement was under attack. Members were told they faced immediate destruction. Sometimes they were instructed to prepare for death. In several reported incidents, followers were given cups containing liquid and informed that it contained poison. After everyone drank, Jones revealed that it had been a test, a loyalty test, a rehearsal, proof that followers were willing to obey him completely. The psychological impact was enormous. Each exercise normalized the possibility of mass death. Each rehearsal pushed residents closer to accepting the unthinkable. Most did not realize they were preparing for a tragedy that would soon become reality. The world begins to notice. Back in the United States, worried family members continued demanding answers. Many had received disturbing reports from former temple members. Some claimed their relatives were being held against their will. Others believed loved ones were trapped inside Jonestown. These concerns eventually reached the attention of Congressman Leo Ryan. Ryan was known for personally investigating controversial situations. Rather than relying solely on reports, he preferred to see conditions firsthand. In November 1978, Ryan organized a fact-finding mission to Guyana. Accompanied by journalists, aides, and concerned relatives, he traveled to Jonestown. Initially, the visit appeared successful. Residents greeted the delegation. Performances were organized. Meals were shared. Jones attempted to present an image of happiness and stability. But beneath the surface, tensions were rising. Several residents secretly approached Ryan's group. They wanted to leave. Some passed handwritten notes. Others quietly expressed fears for their safety. For the first time, cracks in the facade became impossible to hide. When Ryan announced that anyone wishing to leave could accompany him, multiple residents accepted. Jones realized what this meant. If defectors spoke freely, the truth about Jonestown could soon become public. His dream was collapsing. His authority was being challenged, and his response would change history forever. The beginning of the end, November 18th, 1978. For Congressman Leo Ryan and those accompanying him, the situation had become increasingly tense. Several Jonestown residents had chosen to leave with the delegation. Others were considering it. The atmosphere inside the settlement had changed dramatically. What had begun as a routine visit was now exposing the reality behind Jim Jones's carefully crafted image. Ryan and his group prepared to depart. A convoy transported them toward a nearby airstrip at Port Kaituma. The defectors who had chosen to leave traveled with them. Many were nervous. Some feared retaliation. They had spent years inside an environment where questioning Jones was dangerous. Now they were attempting to escape his control. As the group arrived at the airstrip, they believed the hardest part was over. They were wrong. Back in Jonestown, Jones faced the greatest threat of his leadership. If former members reached the United States and spoke publicly, investigations would intensify. More followers might leave. The organization could collapse. For a man who demanded complete control, that possibility was unacceptable. A decision was made. Several armed temple loyalists were dispatched to the airstrip. Moments later, gunfire erupted. Chaos spread instantly. People ran for cover. Some attempted to hide beneath aircraft. Others fled across the open ground. The attack lasted only minutes, but its consequences would echo throughout history. Congressman Leo Ryan was killed. 4 other individuals also lost their lives. Several more were seriously wounded. Ryan became the first sitting member of the United States Congress ever assassinated while performing official duties. News of the attack would soon reach the world. And inside Jonestown, Jim Jones knew that everything was about to change. Authorities would come, investigations would follow. The settlement would never survive what came next. Jones had spent years convincing followers that enemies would eventually destroy them. Now he claimed that moment had arrived. The final gathering. Shortly after the airstrip attack, residents were summoned to the central pavilion. Hundreds gathered, parents held children, families sat together. Others listened anxiously as Jones addressed the crowd. Audio recordings from that meeting still exist today. They provide a chilling glimpse into the final hours of Jonestown. Jones spoke about the deaths at the airstrip. He insisted that retaliation was inevitable. According to him, government forces would soon arrive. they would torture children, destroy families, punish everyone associated with the People's Temple. There was little evidence that such an invasion was imminent. But after years of fear, isolation, and psychological conditioning, many followers accepted Jones's claims. He presented only two choices: surrender to hostile enemies, or die together on their own terms. Jones referred to this as revolutionary suicide. The phrase was powerful. It transformed mass death into an act of political resistance. It allowed followers to view a horrifying decision as something noble. Some residents protested. A few argued that there must be another option. Others questioned whether death was truly necessary. But Jones quickly dismissed objections. Years of conditioning had weakened resistance. Most members had been taught to trust him above anyone else. The man they had followed for years was now leading them toward disaster. The tragedy. Large containers were brought forward. A fruit-flavored drink was mixed with poison and sedatives. The exact sequence of events remains debated by historians. Some victims may have consumed the mixture voluntarily. Others likely did so under pressure. Still others may have been forced. What is known is that parents were instructed to give the liquid to their children first. For many observers, this remains the most heartbreaking aspect of the tragedy. Children had no choice. They had no understanding of the decisions being made around them. They were entirely dependent upon the adults who trusted Jim Jones. As the poison took effect, panic spread through parts of the settlement. People collapsed. Families cried. Confusion mixed with fear. Within a short period, hundreds were dead. The process continued until more than 900 people had lost their lives. Among them were over 300 children. The scale of the tragedy was almost impossible to comprehend. It remains one of the deadliest cult-related disasters in history. As for Jim Jones himself, he did not die from the poison. He was later discovered with a fatal gunshot wound to the head. Whether the shot was self-inflicted or delivered by another person remains a subject of debate. Either way, the man who had promised salvation was dead, and the community he created had been destroyed. In Discovery, when authorities finally arrived, they encountered a scene unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Bodies covered the grounds of Jonestown. Entire families lay together, parents beside children, friends beside friends. Rows upon rows of victims stretched across the settlement. Photographs taken at the scene shocked the world. Television broadcasts carried images into millions of homes. Newspapers across the globe featured the disaster on their front pages. Many struggled to understand how such a catastrophe could happen. How could ordinary people follow a leader so completely? How could warning signs go unnoticed for so long? How had a movement that began with promises of equality ended in mass death? These questions would fuel decades of investigation and research. Chapter 6. Legacy. The tragedy at Jonestown permanently changed how the public viewed cults. Before 1978, many people associated cults with unusual religious groups or fringe beliefs. After Jonestown, the dangers became impossible to ignore. Psychologists, sociologists, historians, and law enforcement agencies began studying the methods used by destructive leaders. Researchers discovered recurring patterns: charismatic leadership, isolation from outside influences, control of information, financial dependence, fear-based manipulation, demand for absolute loyalty. These warning signs appeared repeatedly in destructive groups around the world. The story of Jim Jones became a case study in how manipulation can gradually override independent thinking. Importantly, the victims were not unintelligent. They were not foolish. Many were educated, compassionate people who genuinely wanted to improve society. What drew them to People's Temple was not evil. It was hope. Hope for equality, hope for community, hope for a better future. Jones exploited those hopes for his own purposes. That lesson remains relevant today. Modern cults continue to exist. Some are religious, others are political. Some revolve around self-help movements or charismatic personalities. The methods may evolve, but the underlying tactics often remain similar. Experts frequently point to Jonestown when teaching people how to recognize manipulation and coercive control. Why Jim Jones remains one of history's most dangerous cult leaders. Many cult leaders have caused harm. Some have exploited followers financially, others have abused their authority, a few have committed crimes. Jim Jones stands apart because of the scale of the tragedy. His influence reached thousands. His authority became nearly absolute. And the consequences of his actions resulted in the deaths of more than 900 people. Few individuals in modern history have exercised such destructive control over so many lives. His story serves as a warning about the dangers of unchecked power. It demonstrates how charismatic leadership can become dangerous when followers are discouraged from questioning authority. It reveals how fear can be used to manipulate people into accepting the unacceptable. And it reminds us that freedom of thought is one of the most important protections any society possesses. Conclusion: Jim Jones did not begin his life as a notorious cult leader. He began as a lonely child fascinated by religion and influence. Over time, he built a movement that attracted thousands of followers. He preached equality. He promised justice. He offered community to people searching for hope. But beneath those promises grew a hunger for power. As his authority expanded, so did his control. As his paranoia deepened, so did the suffering of his followers. And in the jungles of Guyana, that journey reached its devastating conclusion. More than 4 decades later, the name Jim Jones remains synonymous with manipulation, fanaticism, and tragedy. The story of Jonestown is not merely a historical event. It is a warning, a reminder that no leader should ever be beyond question, that loyalty should never replace critical thinking, and that whenever one person demands complete obedience, the path toward disaster may already have begun. End of documentary.